Are you looking for some short fantasy book recommendations? Then this video is for you. Hi and welcome back, my fellow fantasy book lovers, or if you're new here, hi and welcome. My name is Kathy and I'm a fantasy book lover from Belgium. For today's video, I compiled a bunch of small fantasy books because sometimes you just want something short and sweet that still gives you a complete story. Let's start with the shortest book on this pile. It is The Pale Dreamer by Samantha, Shannon. This is actually a novel that comes before the Bone season. So in this series, it's actually book 0.5 and it is a tiny pocket book with only 81 pages. This is teeny tiny, but this gives you a little more depth and explanation of the world building that the Bone season takes part in. Is this absolutely necessary to read if you want to read the Bone season? No, but I found it a good addition to the knowledge that you have on the world, etc. And I was lucky enough to get this tiny pocket book as part of the English Book Week here in Belgium. I am not sure if there's actual physical editions of this, but having this teeny tiny cutesy book really makes me happy. And for those of you who don't know what the Bone season is, it is an urban fantasy series written by Samantha, Shannon, in which we follow Paige Mahoney, and in this world building, people with psychic powers are seen as something evil, so clairvoyance, etc. And she has one of those powers, she's trying to hide it, but of course she is discovered one day and taken away, and it is everything that happens after that that is super intriguing. And the world this is set in is actually our world, but then like dystopian futuristic. So there is a Paris, there is a London, and the first part of the book actually takes place in this version of London. And it's actually really fun if you go to London to find certain spots that are referenced in this book because they do actually exist. The next book is an epic fantasy with dragons. It is The Fireborn Blade by Charlotte Bond. In this book, we follow a female knight who needs to redeem herself by going to slay a dragon. Now, this book jumps a lot, so every chapter is somewhere different. Sometimes we follow the main story, sometimes we go back to her past, and even in some other chapters, we are referencing back to a book with encounters of dragons from the past from other knights. This is a very short and sweet read. I personally finished it, I think, in a day. My partner is spending a little bit longer on reading this, but that's also completely fine. And if you enjoyed this book, there is also a second book that has come out in the meantime that you could pick up, and it's also a short novella. It really follows on this book, so you really need to read The Fireborn Blade first. Up next, we have something completely different. Scarlett St. Clair writes fantasy romance novels with smut in them, and this series is no different. These are all fairy tale retellings. You have mountains made of glass, and there's also apples dipped in gold, of which I do not own a physical copy. These follow 7 fae princes, but you actually follow the female main character that will encounter them. These are all a little bit darker fantasy romance, and it keeps you on edge, like what is happening. There's this big moral impact on the story, like is something good, is something evil? And of course, these books are full of fairy tale references to the classics. So if you want a fairy tale based fantasy dark romance, then these are for you. Up next, we have Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. Now, T. Kingfisher is notorious for writing novellas that are fantasy-based, but also that are a little bit darker or different takes on stories. In this story, we follow Toad, who is actually protecting the tower in which Sleeping Beauty, or their version of Sleeping Beauty, is being kept. And they are trying their best to keep everyone away from this tower with this evil creature in it, so it is definitely not like the Sleeping Beauty we grew up with. I found this a very endearing book, and also having this different perspective of what happened in the original story for me was very fun. Up next, we have a classic, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This novella is one of the original vampire novellas, one of the first recorded writings about vampires. In this book, we follow our female main character Laura, who lives with her father in a castle, and one day a carriage stops or has a breakdown near their castle, and they go to help them. And that is how the daughter of the woman in the carriage is introduced to Laura. She's called Carmilla, and she's going to stay with the family to recuperate from being ill or from being weakened by the travels, whereas her mother with the carriage and with every servant that they had with is actually going on their journey together. So Carmilla stays with Laura in this castle with the father, and lots of weird things start happening. A lot of people are super enthusiastic about this book. I personally didn't find it the greatest read ever, but if you're into vampire novels and you want to read one of the original ones, then this one is definitely a recommendation. Up next we have When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. We follow our main character Dimitri, who is trying to save a witch, or at least that's what we get told at the beginning of the book. He recuperates this magical plant that only blooms once a year, has to face several trials before actually being able to help said witch. This book was short and sweet. It takes place in an urban fantasy environment, so it has elements from our world that you will definitely recognize, but then also magical elements added to it. This again was a complete story in a short novella. I feel like this was a really fun read, and I kind of wished that the book was thicker and that there was more to it, but maybe someday in the future the author comes with more books in this series, which is something that I would definitely like. And then the last book on my list is 6 Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent, and I think if I have to pick one favorite, that this one would be it. 6 Scorched Roses is a novella that is part of the vampire universe of Carissa Broadbent, and it actually comes in between Serpent and the Wings of Night and Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. However, you can perfectly read this book on its own. We follow our female main character, Lilith, who lives in this cursed village. Now, the curse has actually been cast on this village years and years ago, and it makes that people go ill, and she's trying to find a cure for this illness. Now, her sister becomes ill, so the pressure increases on her trying to find a cure, and she has an idea that she wants to do, and it is to use vampire blood, and luckily for her, there is exactly one vampire in the vicinity. She goes to that vampire and offers him 6 roses in exchange for 6 vials of blood. And yeah, I think this was beautifully written in the few amount of pages that it has. It was a complete story. I like this couple maybe even more than the main couple from Serpent and the Wings of Night, but didn't tell anyone. This is a book that I started reading and could not put down. I loved it so much, and if you're into fantasy romance with vampires, I think you will love this too. These are all the short fantasy novels that I currently have in my collection. However, I would love to find out about more. So if you have any other fantasy book recommendations under 250 pages, feel free to share them down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already and you'd like to be, of course, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week, and I would love to have you for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading. Bye!